Krystal, what are you taking a look at?
Well, in an election full of stunners and big upsets, one of the biggest came in the fiercely contested Senate race in Pennsylvania. Now, the storyline almost reads like a movie. You've got the brash steel town mayor, a larger-than-life figure, laid low by a devastating stroke. He literally won the Democratic primary against the entire Democratic establishment while laying in a hospital bed. Up in the general election, he's up against a rich celebrity TV doctor brought to stardom by Oprah herself. And after a brutal debate performance by Fetterman, it looked like the smarmy celeb was poised to take advantage of Fetterman's health struggles. But then, on election day, what do you know? Not only did Fetterman win, it wasn't actually all that close. He bested Dr. Oz by more than 4 points. He performed better than Trump, Biden, or outgoing Senator Pat Toomey in the state, cut down on rural margins, and won back white working-class voters who had been fleeing the party in droves. So how did this man, struggling to recover under the glare of a national spotlight, actually pull this all off? Well, Fetterman's unexpected against-the-odds win is a perfect parable of what happened in this election, and specifically how the media misunderstands politics, voters, and elections. In almost every instance, their narrative of this race in particular was not just off, but actually the polar opposite of reality. And it was ass backwards in ways that are consistent with their misreading of this election and many other elections besides. So let's dig in to 3 of the myths and what the actual reality is. So the first myth is that Fetterman is a bad candidate. Let's start off by talking about that debate. It was pretty rough, y'all. If you are a remotely empathetic person, it was painful to watch this burly figure struggle to get his words out when it mattered most. Media was quick to pronounce it a disaster and potentially campaign ending. I couldn't help wondering myself if the principled choice to do the debate had ended in political catastrophe for the big man. But as I argued here, I wasn't so convinced that voters would read it the way that the pundit class did. Perhaps, instead, they'd see Fetterman as kind of courageous for subjecting himself to such a humbling, humiliating experience and for showing such vulnerability. Perhaps they'd see in Oz's performance the smarmy dickishness that had held his approval ratings deep underwater. And it turned out, when all was said and done, I was correct. Because not only did the debate seemingly not hurt Fetterman, there's actually an argument it helped him. In fact, according to favorability tracking of the race by Civics, Oz's favorability rating had been slowly improving up until that debate. Afterwards, it stopped dead in its tracks, leaving him upside down by a devastating 22 points. Fetterman, on the other hand, saw his favorables actually gain slightly following that supposedly devastating debate performance, going from slightly underwater to actually neutral leading into Election Day. In the end, Oz's debate quip that abortion should be between women, doctors, and local political leaders might have ended up being the most consequential moment of the night. Now, the lesson here is that candidate quality does actually matter. The media just has no clue what qualities voters actually care about. In Pennsylvania, they cared more about Fetterman's authenticity than about his health struggles. They cared more about Oz being out of touch than his slick TV presentation skills. In the same way, while Herschel Walker still not a great candidate because of his strained relationship with the truth, he is actually probably a better candidate than Oz, who is elitist, Blake Masters, who just comes across as extremely strange, and J.D. Vance, who came across as wildly inauthentic. Mitch McConnell's lead pollster apparently said that he had never seen a candidate do as poorly in focus group testing as Blake Masters. Vance, of course, was able to win, but underperformed in every county in the entire state. Turns out that fallible humanity trumps a silver tongue, celebrity, or fancy credentials when it comes to the voters. The second myth that was destroyed by Fetterman's win is that progressive policies are bad politics. So, before the stroke and before he was up against Oz, the entire Democratic establishment was aligned against Fetterman, backing corporatist golden boy Conor Lamb. Lamb nearly swept the endorsement race, garnering the backing of state and national electeds. The reason for this lopsided situation was simple. Lamb was a centrist and Fetterman was a Bernie lefty. The powers that be thought Lamb would be more electable and probably worried also about Fetterman being less easily controlled. Well, we all know what happened next. Fetterman destroyed Lamb, romping with a 30-point margin over the anointed golden boy. In the general election, Oz's team seized on Fetterman's progressive credentials as their primary line of attack. They bashed him in paid ads and on social media as being supposedly a Bernie Sanders socialist. But none of this scared Fetterman off from embracing a left economic populism, and he arguably pulled it off better than any other Senate candidate in the entire country. Fetterman's profile was perfect, of course. The heavily tattooed former Steel Town mayor who looked the most himself in a pair of basketball shorts and a hoodie even in 30-degree weather. But more important than the everyman vibes was the policy posture. He was unabashedly pro-union. Labor went all in for him. He was also unabashedly pro-weed, which in focus groups is actually one of the top policy issues that voters associated with him. He leaned into a message about corporate price gouging rather than just ceding economic issues to Dr. Oz and the Republicans. And his negative messaging on Oz was also pitch-perfect economic populism. Part of why Oz's favorability ratings were so low was because a devastating early campaign by Fetterman to define him as a rich Hollywood, New Jersey elitist who was more familiar with crudité than with the Steelers' home game schedule, and who couldn't possibly relate to the struggles of normal Pennsylvanians. In the end, Fetterman's lefty economic populism was a boon and not a curse. In fact, if you dig into the numbers, Fetterman, the furthest left battleground Senate candidate in the whole country, outperformed every other Democratic candidate with independents. Take a look at this. He did better with independents than Mark Kelly, someone who positions himself as a moderate and has a generally positive statewide profile in Arizona. Did way better with independents than Raphael Warnock, a man who talks and inspires for a living as a pastor. But I've got a metric that is even better than that. I am obsessed with these maps in the New York Times that show how the vote shifted between the 2020 presidential election and 2022. Most of them look a lot like this one in Georgia. Some of the areas shifted more to the Republicans, some shifted more to the Democrats. But here you can see Warnock outperforming Biden in and around Atlanta, while Walker made gains in the rural parts of the state. Now take a look at the map of Pennsylvania. Fetterman literally gained in every single county in the entire state. And not only that, his strongest gains came in rural areas with the very white working class voters who've been fleeing the party since the Obama era and accelerated under Donald Trump. The very voters, by the way, who Oz's socialism scare messaging was aimed directly at. Fetterman's largest outperformance came in a place called Greene County, that's in southwestern PA. Now, Greene County is an old steel town where Democrats used to absolutely dominate. But in the Trump era, it went hard to the right. Trump won it easily with 68% of the vote in 2016, and in 2020, the county shifted even further, handing him 71% of the vote. Now, it's easy to assume that these realignments are just done, that they're set in stone, but actually, Fetterman clawed back 13 points of that margin. He still lost Greene County, mind you, but there's a big difference between losing by 30 and losing by 43, especially when you replicate that consistently across every rural county in the state. Turns out that Fetterman-style left economic populism is a winner and the key to reversing the working class realignment of the Trump era. It is also key to creating a durable majority that can do more than eke out narrow wins. The final myth here is that Obama is a political master and Biden is a dud. In the final stretch of the campaign, Obama came out barnstorming for candidates across the country to rapturous reviews from the media, and there is no doubt on the measures of pure rhetorical prowess and ability to boost his own brand, former President Obama is second to none. But as I pointed out at the time, this never translated into gains for his party, especially not during his time in office. Obama oversaw a bloodbath of more than 1,000 state legislative seat losses. He lost governor's mansions, the House, the Senate, and ultimately handed the presidency off to Donald J. Trump. Biden's midterm record is now the polar opposite of Obama's. He held the Senate and might even pick up a seat. In spite of coming in with a very narrow margin for error, Democrats still have a shot at holding the House, although that looks very unlikely now. But some of the most impressive victories for Democrats came at the state level, where they flipped state legislatures, won back governor's mansions, made back ground among demographics like Latinos and white working class voters that had been increasingly moving to the right. Nowhere was Biden's midterm success more impressive than in the Midwest. Now, I broke this down in detail for the lever, but the gist is this. Up and down ballot, Dems beat polls and generated upsets across PA, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and even reclaimed some of the ground they have lost in recent years in Ohio. And to get this back to the protagonist of our story here, John Fetterman, the party's unusual strength in the so-called Rust Belt is part of what helped sweep Fetterman into office. So to what do we attribute this success? Well, no accident this region also is the one that has benefited most from Biden's baby steps towards economic patriotism, from nibbling at industrial policy to green manufacturing, pro-union personnel, and also antitrust enforcement. Under Biden, bottom line, some 350,000 jobs have come back to the US. That is a dramatic turnaround from the accelerated offshoring job losses of the Trump and the Obama administrations. Some of this is because of Biden's policy, some of it isn't. But even these incremental half measures are a damn sight better than what has been a devastating stretch for this region of just getting kicked in the face routinely by every politician from every party. Turns out, when you do even the bare minimum for people, they tend to vote for you. The reason the media rates Obama as a god and Biden as a schmuck has everything to do with the first two media myths that I just described. They think the candidate qualities that voters care most about are rhetorical skill and charisma. What voters actually value in terms of personal qualities is humanity and authenticity. They also think that left economic policies are an albatross rather than a strength. How much hand-wringing and haranguing did we see about Biden's economic policies and how he'd spent too much money? Think of Larry Summers and the other mainstream deficit hawks who gained a lot of purchase in mainstream media spaces. Turns out, the little bit that Biden did for people was a huge factor in this election. Look no further than the student debt relief, which was much derided by mainstream pundits, but which contributed to a youth vote shift, which arguably saved Dems' asses across the entire country. Obama's personal charisma meant that people admired and voted for him, yes, even as they felt increasing contempt for the party as a whole. Biden, on the other hand, his solid policy steps have improved the party's standing in a lot of the country, and particularly in the Midwestern region that has benefited most from them. This made the landscape much easier for John Fetterman, Gretchen Whitmer, Tony Evers, and a lot more. All right, it's a lot to learn from and grapple with for all of us. But if the lessons from this midterm are that humanity beats showmanship and that policy substance actually maybe matters, well then the results of this election really did defy the modern odds and could chart a very different path for American politics. And Saagar, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is the difference. Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.